Through the Tunnel, Part 2. Soon she walked slowly up the path, swinging her striped bag, she flushed, naked arm dangling beside her. "I want some swimming goggles," he panted, defiant and beseeching. She gave him a patient, inquisitive look as she said casually, "Well, of course, darling. But now! He must have them this minute, and no other time." He nagged and pestered until she went with him to a shop. As soon as she had bought the goggles, he grabbed them from her hand as if she were going to claim them for herself, and was off, running down the steep path to the bay. Jerry swam out to the big barrier rock, adjusted the goggles, and dived. The impact of the water broke the rubber-enclosed vacuum, and the goggles came loose. He understood that he must swim down to the base of the rock from the surface of the water. He fixed the goggles tight and firm, filled his lungs, and floated, face down, on the water. Now he could see. It was as if he had eyes of a different kind, fish eyes that showed everything clear and delicate and wavering in the bright water. Under him, 6 or 7 feet down, was a floor of perfectly clean, shining white sand, rippled, firm, and hard by the tides. 2 grayish shapes stared there like long, rounded pieces of wood or slate. They were fish. He saw them nose toward each other, poise motionless, make a dart forward, swerve off, and come around again. It was like a water dance. A few inches above them, the water sparkled as if sequins were dropping through it. Fish again, myriads of minute fish, the length of his fingernail, were drifting through the water, and in a moment he could feel the innumerable tiny touches of them against his limbs. It was like swimming in flaked silver. The great rock the big boys had swum through rose sheer out of the white sand, black, tufted lightly with a greenish weed. He could see no gap in it. He swam down to its base. Again and again he rose, took a big chestful of air, and went down. Again and again he groped over the surface of the rock, feeling it, almost hugging it in a desperate need to find the entrance. And then, once while he was clinging to the black wall, his knees came up and he shot his feet out forward, and they met no obstacle. He had found the hole. He gained the surface, clambering about the stones that littered the barrier rock until he found a big one, and, with this in his arms, let himself down over the side of the rock. He dropped, with the weight, straight to the sandy floor. Clinging tight to the anchor of stone, he lay on his side and looked in under the dark shelf at a place where his feet had gone. He could see the hole. It was an irregular, dark gap, but he could not see deep into it. He let go of his anchor, clung with his hands to the edge of the hole, and tried to push himself in. He got his head in, found his shoulders jammed, moved them in sideways, and was inside as far as his waist. He could see nothing ahead. Something soft and clammy touched his mouth. He saw a dark frond moving against the grayish rock, and panic filled him. He thought of octopuses, of clinging weed. He pushed himself out backward and caught a glimpse, as he retreated, of a harmless tentacle of seaweed drifting in the mouth of the tunnel. But it was enough. He reached the sunlight, swam to shore, and lay on the diving rock. He looked down into the blue well of water. He knew he must find his way through that cave or hole or tunnel, and out the other side. First, he thought, he must learn to control his breathing. He let himself down into the water with another big stone in his arms, so that he could lie effortlessly on the bottom of the sea. He counted. 1, 2, 3. He counted steadily. He could hear the movement of blood in his chest. 51, 52. His chest was hurting. He let go of the rock and went up into the air. He saw that the sun was low. He rushed to the villa and found his mother at her supper. She only said, "Did you enjoy yourself?" And he said, "Yes." All night the boy dreamed of the water-filled cave in the rock, and as soon as breakfast was over he went to the bay. That night his nose bled badly. For hours he had been under water, learning to hold his breath, and now he felt weak and dizzy. His mother said, "I shouldn't overdo things, darling, if I were you." That day and the next, Jerry exercised his lungs as if everything, his whole of his life, all that he would become, depended upon it. Again his nose bled at night, and his mother insisted on his coming with her the next day. It was a torment to him to waste a day of his careful self-training. But he stayed with her on that other beach, which now seemed a place for small children, a place where his mother might lie safe in the sun. It was not his beach. He did not ask for permission on the following day to go to his beach. He went, before his mother would consider the complicated rights and wrongs of the matter. A day's rest, he discovered, had improved his count by 10. The big boys had made the passage while he counted 160. He had been counting fast in his fright. Probably now, if he tried, he could get through that long tunnel, but he was not going to try yet. A curious, most unchildlike persistence, a controlled impatience made him wait. In the meantime, he lay under water in the white sand, littered now by stones he had brought down from the upper air, and studied the entrance to the tunnel. He knew every jut and corner of it, as far as it was possible to see. It was as if he already felt its sharpness about his shoulders. He sat by the clock in the villa, when his mother was not near, and checked his time. He was incredulous, and then proud to find he could hold his breath without strain for 2 minutes. The words 2 minutes, authorized by the clock, brought close the adventure that was so necessary to him. In another 4 days, his mother said casually one morning, they must go home. On the day before they left, he would do it. He would do it if it killed him, he said defiantly to himself. But 2 days before they were to leave, a day of triumph when he increased his count by 15, his nose bled so badly that he turned dizzy and had to lie limply over the big rock like a bit of seaweed, watching the thick red blood flow on the rock and trickle slowly down to the sea. He was frightened. Supposing he turned dizzy in the tunnel? Supposing he died there, trapped? Supposing his head went around in the hot sun and he almost gave up? He thought he would return to the house and lie down, and next summer, perhaps, when he had another year's growth in him. Then he would go through the hole. But even after he had made the decision, or thought he had, he found himself sitting up on the dock and looking down into the water, and he knew that now, this moment, when his nose had only just stopped bleeding, when his head was still sore and throbbing, this was the moment when he would try. If he did not do it now, he never would. He was trembling with fear that he would not go, and he was trembling with horror that long, long tunnel under the rock, under the sea. Even in the open sunlight, the barrier rock seemed very wide and very heavy. Tons of rock pressed down on where he would go. If he died there, he would lie until one day, perhaps not before next year, those big boys would swim into it and find it blocked. He put on his goggles, fitted them tight, tested the vacuum. His hands were shaking. Then he chose the biggest stone he could carry and slipped over the edge of the rock until half of him was in the cool enclosing water and half in the hot sun. He looked up once at the empty sky, filled his lungs once, twice, and then sank fast to the bottom of the stone. He let it go and began to count. He took the edge of the hole in his hands and drew himself into it, wriggling his shoulders in sideways as he remembered he must, kicking himself along with his feet. Soon he was clear inside. He was in a small rock-bound hole filled with yellowish-gray water. The water was pushing him up against the roof. The roof was sharp and pained his back. He pulled himself along with his hands, fast, fast, and used his legs as levers. His head knocked against something. The sharp pain dizzied him. 50, 51, 52. He was without light, and the water seemed to press upon him with the weight of rock. 71, 72. There was no strain on his lungs. He felt like an inflated balloon. His lungs were so light and easy, but his head was pulsing. He was being continually pressed against the sharp roof, which felt slimy as well as sharp. Again he thought of octopuses and wondered if the tunnel might be filled with weeds so that could tangle him. He gave himself a panicky, convulsive kick forward, ducked his head, and swam. His feet and hands moved freely as if in open water. The hole must have widened out. He thought he must be swimming fast, and he was frightened of banging his head if the tunnel narrowed. 100, 101. The water paled. Victory filled him. His lungs were beginning to hurt. A few more strokes and he would be out. He was counting wildly. He said 115, and then, a long time later, 115 again. The water was a clear jewel green all around him. Then he saw, above his head, a crack running up through the rock. Sunlight was falling through it, showing the clean, dark rock of the tunnel. A single mussel shell, and darkness ahead. He was at the end of what he could do. He looked up at the crack as if it were filled with air and not water, as if he could put his mouth to it and draw in air. 115, he heard himself say inside his head. But he had said that long ago. He must go on into the blackness ahead, or he would drown. His head was swelling, his lungs cracking. 115 pounded through his head, and he feebly clutched at rocks in the dark, pulling himself forward, leaving the brief space of sunlit water behind. He felt he was dying. He was no longer quite conscious. He struggled on in the darkness between lapses into unconsciousness. An immense swelling pain filled his head, and then the darkness cracked with an explosion of green light. His hands groping forward met nothing, and his feet, kicking back, propelled him out into the open sea. He drifted to the surface, his face turned up to the air. He was gasping like a fish. He felt he would sink now and drown. He could not swim the few feet back to the rock. Then he was clutching it and pulling himself up onto it. He lay face down, gasping. He could see nothing but a red vein clotted dark. His eyes must have burst, he thought. They were full of blood. He tore off his goggles, and a gout of blood went into the sea. His nose was bleeding, and the blood had filled the goggles. He scooped up handfuls of water from the cool, salty sea to splash on his face, and did not know whether it was blood or salt water he tasted. After a time, his heart quieted, his eyes cleared, and he sat up. He could see the local boys diving and playing a half-mile away. He did not want them. He wanted nothing but to get back home and lie down. In a short while, Jerry swam to shore and climbed slowly up the path to the villa. He flung himself on his bed and slept, waking at the sound of feet on the path outside. His mother was coming back. He rushed to the bathroom, thinking she must not see his face with blood-stains or tear-stains on it. He came out of the bathroom and met her as she walked to the villa, smiling, her eyes lighting up. "Have a nice morning?" she asked, laying her hand on his warm brown shoulder a moment. "Oh, yes, thank you," he said. "You look a bit pale," and then sharp and anxious. "How did you bang your head?" "Oh, just banged it," he told her. She looked at him closely. He was strained. His eyes were glazed-looking. She was worried. And then she said to herself, "Oh, don't fuss. Nothing can happen. He can swim like a fish." They sat down to lunch together. "Mummy," he said, "I can stay under water for 2 minutes. 3 minutes at least." It came bursting out of him. "Can you, darling?" she said. "Well, I shouldn't overdo it. I don't think you ought to swim any more today." She was ready for a battle of wills, but he gave in at once. It was no longer of the least importance to go to the bay.